Welcome, dear listener, to a journey not through the grand halls of power or the quiet lives of peasants, but into a corner of the past where the air hung heavy with a different kind of presence. Allow your breath to deepen, your shoulders to soften, and the persistent hum of your own present moment to gently recede. Let the familiar sounds of your day dissolve, like mist on a distant field, as we drift into a time when life and death met in a raw, undeniable embrace. Find comfort in this stillness, this gentle invitation to simply be. As you settle into this quiet space, perhaps you might share in the comments below where in the world you are listening from and what time of day it is for you. And if these calm, historical meanderings offer a moment of quiet solace, a subtle invitation rests with you to subscribe, to join us again as we explore the echoes of lives long past. Now, feel the air around you begin to shift, subtly, imperceptibly. The light outside your window might seem to dim or perhaps to soften, as if filtering through layers of time itself. The sounds you know so well begin to thin, becoming indistinct, like whispers carried on a faraway breeze. You are stepping, not with your feet, but with your very presence, into a distant, visceral existence. A faint scent, earthy and deep, might begin to waft through the air, carrying echoes of damp soil and something more primal, something metallic. Let your mind quiet, allowing yourself to be guided by sensation alone. The familiar textures of your immediate surroundings soften, their sharp edges blurring. Time itself seems to become viscous, slowing to a thick, honeyed flow, allowing every detail to linger, to be fully felt. The breath deepens, slowing to match an ancient rhythm as the world of long ago gradually reveals its intricate, raw reality. The world that slowly, patiently reveals itself is a tapestry woven from raw materials and constant labor. Dwellings rise from the earth, their forms often low and sturdy, their walls crafted from the immediate surroundings. Most are built from heavy, unplaned timbers, dark with the passage of many seasons. Their surfaces rough to the touch, often splintered. The spaces between these stout beams are filled with wattle and daub, a patient weaving of supple branches coated thickly with layers of clay and straw, creating walls that breathe with the changing humidity, often releasing the faint, earthy scent of damp soil. In villages and towns, some structures might be built of rough-hewn stone, heavy and cool to the touch, absorbing the deep chill of winter and the pervasive damp that often permeates the air. Over these walls, thick thatch roofs are layered deep with dried reeds or straw, a substantial living blanket that sighs softly with every gust of wind, catching the rain in a gentle, rhythmic patter and muffling the loudest sounds from the sky. From a small, usually unglazed opening in these roofs, or from a crude hole in a wall, a constant, thin plume of wood smoke curls upwards, a living breath against the vast sky, its pervasive, comforting scent clinging to every thread of clothing, to every strand of hair, to the very air of human habitation. This scent is rarely absent. It is the smell of warmth, of sustenance, of continuous life. The ground underfoot is a direct, unfiltered connection to the raw earth. Inside the dwellings, it is most often packed earth, hardened by the tireless tread of countless feet, sometimes covered with scattered rushes or coarsely woven mats made of straw or reeds. These offer a slight give beneath the foot and absorb some of the dampness that rises from the soil below. Outside, paths are simply trodden earth, turning to thick, clinging mud after rain, its rich, wet scent rising with every step. In the dry seasons, this mud hardens into cracked, uneven surfaces, the dust lifting with every breath of wind, settling on every surface, the leaves of plants, the rough fabric of clothes, the very skin itself. The sensation underfoot is rarely smooth or even. There is the subtle give of damp soil, the sharp pressure of a hidden stone, the squelch of mud between bare toes, the dry grittiness of dust clinging to the soles. It is a constant, intimate dialogue with the ground, its textures shifting with the rhythms of weather and season. The air is filled with organic sounds woven into the very fabric of daily existence. The distant lowing of cattle, a deep, resonant call carried across the fields, or the insistent bleating of sheep from a nearby pen. The sharp, triumphant crow of a rooster announces the unseen hours, marking the passage of dawn and midday with unvarying regularity. The rhythmic clink of a bucket chain at the well, followed by the clear splash of water as it strikes the surface far below, signals a constant, vital task. The soft rustle of wind through tall grass or the heavy leaves of ancient trees provides a pervasive, whispering presence, a constant murmur. Within the dwelling, the omnipresent crackle and hiss of the hearth fire offers a steady, comforting rhythm. A living presence in the heart of the home, its subtle shifts in sound accompanying every task. The soft thud of kneading dough against a wooden board, the rhythmic scrape of a wooden spoon against an earthenware pot, the quiet murmur of voices when permitted. These are the intimate sounds of human domesticity. There are no sudden, jarring mechanical noises, no abrupt roars or blares. The soundscape is fluid, alive with the subtle workings of nature and human effort, each sound distinct, yet blending into a continuous, natural hum. Even moments of quiet are not truly silent. They are filled with the subtle shifting of the dwelling as it settles, the faint scuttling of unseen creatures in the thatch, the deep, ancient resonance of the earth itself, a vast, quiet breathing. Textures are immediate, rough and honest, speaking of their raw origins and purposeful use. The unplaned surface of timber, its subtle splinters, a constant reminder of its natural state, feels solid and unyielding beneath the palm. The cool, granular feel of rough-cut stone, absorbing the sun's warmth or the night's chill, feels ancient beneath the hand, bearing the marks of wind and rain. The dry, brittle touch of straw, crumbling slightly when crushed, offers a fleeting, earthy sensation. Its scent faint and sweet. Wool, often coarse and undyed, scratches persistently against the skin, yet provides indispensable warmth, its faint lanolin scent a reminder of its animal origin, an intimate presence. Linen spun by hand feels softer, but still retains a subtle irregularity from its hand processing, far from the smooth refinement of later fabrics, its coolness a subtle relief in warmth. Clay pots, often unglazed and porous, hold water and food, their surfaces cool and slightly gritty to the touch, often smelling faintly of damp earth or their stored contents, a constant reminder of their origin. Metal, when present, is usually iron, heavy and strong, often blackened by fire and use. Its surface sometimes pitted from the blacksmith's hammer, giving it a tactile history, cool and hard to the touch. Every object speaks of its maker, its material, its purpose, its long use, conveying a sense of enduring connection between human hands and the natural world. Your fingers learn to read the language of these textures, their weight, their coolness, their subtle imperfections, each touch a quiet conversation with the tangible world. Natural light dictates the rhythms of existence with an absolute, unyielding authority. There is no artificial illumination to extend the hours of work or leisure beyond the sun's decree. Dawn brings a slow, creeping illumination, a gentle gray that gradually strengthens, revealing the world in a soft, muted palette, colors emerging slowly from the lingering shadows. Midday sees the sun at its most intense, casting sharp, defined shadows outside. Though often muted within dwellings by thick walls and small unglazed openings, creating pools of bright light and deep, cool shadows within the interior. As evening approaches, the light softens, turning golden, then deepens into a profound twilight until only the faint glow of the moon and stars, or the flickering warmth of a hearth fire or a single candle remains to pierce the absolute darkness. Life adapts instinctively to this ebb and flow, rising with the sun, settling with its descent. Work is done by the light of day. Evenings are for quieter tasks by the fire's glow, for shared warmth, for storytelling in the shifting shadows, where faces are illuminated by dancing flames, and the outside world recedes into deep darkness and silence. It sounds muffled. The absence of constant, bright light encourages a different way of seeing, an appreciation for the subtleties of illumination, for the way a single flame can transform a vast, dark space, making the familiar unfamiliar and drawing people closer around the shared warmth and fragile light. The tools of this era are extensions of the hand and body, crafted for specific tasks, often heavy and unrefined, their surfaces smoothed by repeated contact with human skin and the persistent friction of work. A simple wooden plow, its share perhaps tipped with iron, is dragged slowly by oxen across the fields, turning the earth with a steady, grinding sound, the rich scent of freshly turned soil rising behind it. Hand axes split logs with sharp, percussive blows, the crisp scent of fresh wood filling the air, mingling with the aroma of human effort and sweat. Simple looms weave thread into cloth, with a rhythmic clack of the shuttle and the soft thud of the beater, the warp and weft creating a tangible manifestation of human patience and skill, a rhythmic sound of creation. Each tool carries the weight of its purpose, the history of its use etched into its worn handle, its sharpened edge, its very form speaking of generations of ingenuity applied to necessity. Daily rhythms are inextricably tethered to the cycles of the earth and the demands of subsistence. Planting, harvesting, tending animals, preparing food, mending clothes. These are not hobbies or occasional chores, but the very fabric of existence, demanding constant effort and attention, dictating the flow of the days and seasons, shaping the contours of every life. There is a deeply ingrained understanding of the interdependence between human effort and nature's bounty, a profound respect for the source of all sustenance. These rhythms are not imposed by a clock, but by the needs of the body and the land, by the rising and setting of the sun, by the hunger that grows within the belly and the ache in the limbs. There is a deep, unspoken knowledge in the hands, in the back, in the persistent ache of muscles, that every action, however small, contributes to the ongoing dance of survival. Spaces are defined by function and necessity, deeply intertwined with the routines of life. The single-room dwelling, serving as kitchen, bedroom, and gathering place, its center always the hearth, radiating warmth and light, its air thick with the memory of countless meals and quiet conversations, a constant anchor in the fluctuating cold of the outside world. The byre, sheltering animals close to human warmth, their soft breathing and subtle body heat a constant presence, their specific animal scent a familiar part of the household air, a reminder of the shared life between humans and their beasts. The communal well, a focal point for gathering and exchange, its cool water drawn up bucket by bucket, a vital resource, its stone lip worn smooth by countless hands, echoing with the soft splashes of drawn water. The fields stretching outwards, the ultimate source of life, their contours shaped by generations of labor, their colors shifting with the seasons, green in spring, golden in summer, brown and fallow in winter, a constant visual reminder of the deep, the unending connection to the land. Existence here is raw, immediate, and utterly bound to the natural world. It is a life lived in constant dialogue with the elements, with the rhythms of growth and decay, with the simple, unchanging truths of earth and sky. Every action, every material, every sound speaks of a world deeply intertwined with its environment, where survival is a daily, tangible effort, and time is measured by the sun's passage and the turning of the seasons. The pervasive chill of the early morning, before the sun had begun its slow climb above the horizon, settled deep into the heavy wool and rough linen of the butcher's garments. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, felt raw against the exposed skin of the face. The world was still held in the deep embrace of night, a profound darkness pressing in from all sides, pierced only by the faint, distant glimmer of a few hearth fires in the village. This was the hour of quiet, of profound anticipation, when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Long before the first faint whisper of dawn, the butcher is already awake. There is no need for a clock, no striking bell to rouse from the deep, heavy slumber. The body knows the hour, accustomed to the ancient rhythm of its grim purpose. The eyes, heavy with sleep, open to the absolute darkness within the dwelling, pierced only by the faintest glow from the banked embers in the hearth. The rough wool blanket, heavy and familiar, is pushed aside with a quiet sigh. The packed earth floor, cool beneath the bare feet, sends a subtle chill upward, a bracing sensation in the pre-dawn quiet. The scent of old wood smoke and stale sleep lingers in the air, clinging to the rough fabric of the nightshirt. The movements are slow, deliberate, born of habit and the reluctance of the cold body. The thick, coarse tunic is pulled over the head, its rough texture scratching against the skin, offering a meager warmth against the pervasive chill. The heavy leather apron, stiff with dried fats and long-ago stains, is tied with strong, familiar knots, its weight settling upon the shoulders. The air, drawn deep into the lungs, feels cold and sharp, awakening the senses. The sounds are hushed, the rustle of clothing, the soft shuffle of feet across the earthen floor. The distant lowing of a cow, a soft, melancholy sound from the byre, drifts on the cold air, a subtle prelude to the day's work. Then, the quiet push of the heavy wooden door, its ancient hinges groaning softly in the profound darkness. The air outside is colder, sharper, carrying the dampness of the pre-dawn hours. The breath emerges in a faint, visible mist, dissolving quickly into the vast, silent night. The feet, clad in heavy, worn leather boots, begin their familiar journey. Each step is deliberate, measured, a movement born of long practice and deep knowing. The path beneath the feet is obscured by the absolute darkness, yet known intimately. It is the same path, day after day, week after week, season after season. It leads away from the relative warmth and light of the dwelling, away from the sleeping village, towards a different kind of space, a place set apart. The ground underfoot is uneven, its surface made treacherous by the dampness of the night. Walking toward the killing shed in darkness, the body moves with an almost unconscious precision, guided by instinct and decades of repetition. Beneath the heavy leather boots, the ground gives slightly, its surface yielding to the weight of the step. There is the subtle, slick sensation of boots slipping in old blood and hay. It is a familiar feeling, a pervasive texture that coats the ground around the killing shed, a constant, undeniable reminder of its grim purpose. The straw, laid fresh each day, quickly becomes saturated, mixed with the chilling stickiness of drying life. The squelch of the boots, a soft, damp sound, is absorbed by the dense darkness. The cold air, heavy with the unique scent of the place, seems to carry the pervasive metallic aroma of old, dried blood, mingled with the sweet, earthy smell of damp hay and the deep, rich tang of animal waste. This scent clings to the soles of the boots, to the rough fabric of the clothing, to the very skin itself, a constant presence that permeates the senses even before the work begins. The walls of the killing shed, when they finally loom into sight, are indistinct in the gloom, their rough timbers dark and unyielding. The air here is colder, heavier, charged with a specific, potent odor that marks this place. The single, heavy wooden door, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, opens with a groan, revealing the absolute darkness within, a void deeper than the night outside. The faint glint of unseen surfaces, reflecting some unseen light, hints at the grim tools waiting within. Once inside the chilling darkness of the shed, the first deliberate action of the day begins, a quiet ritual of preparation. There is no fire here, no comforting glow of embers, only the deep, pervasive cold that settles into the bones. The hands, raw and stiff from the morning chill, move with practiced ease through the familiar space, guided by memory and touch alone. The sense of touch becomes paramount in this profound darkness. The fingers, calloused and thick, reach for a specific bundle wrapped in layers of rough cloth. The sound of the cloth unfolding, a soft, dry rustle, breaks the quiet. Within its folds, a collection of essential tools, each one familiar, each one awaiting its grim purpose. The first task is gathering knives. Not just one, but several, each designed for a specific cut, a particular task in the meticulous process of turning living flesh into sustenance. The fingers close around the rough wooden handles, worn smooth by countless hours of use, by the persistent friction of sweat and muscle. The sensation of the cold metal when the blade is touched sends a subtle shiver through the hand, a bracing shock against the dullness of the chill. The weight of each knife, heavy and solid, feels substantial in the palm, a tool of profound consequence. But these are not keen, gleaming edges. These are bone-dull, rust-flecked blades. The persistent dampness of the shed, the constant presence of moisture from blood and animal breath, combined with the lack of meticulous care, means rust is an unceasing battle. The fingers can feel the subtle pitting of the metal, the rough, uneven surface where the sharp edge should be. The very act of touching them conveys a sense of their inefficiency, their lack of sharpness, hinting at the greater effort that will be required. The faint, metallic scent of rust, mingled with the lingering aroma of old blood and wet wood, rises from the blades themselves, a distinct presence in the cold, still air. The rough cloth, perhaps an old piece of linen or coarse wool, wrapped around each blade, serves both to protect the hand and to keep the dull edge from causing accidental harm during transport. The texture of the cloth, dry and frayed, contrasts with the cold, pitted metal beneath it. The sounds of the blades being unwrapped, the soft rustle and clink of metal against metal, are hushed, swallowed by the darkness. Each knife is inspected by touch, its form recognized, its purpose known without the aid of sight. This ritual of gathering is slow, deliberate. Each blade is a quiet commitment to the work ahead. The hands move with an ingrained certainty, drawing each tool into a prepared bundle, perhaps tied together with a length of rough twine, ready to be carried to the place of work. The cold air, pressing against the skin, feels sharper here, amplifying the raw metallic scent that emanates from the tools. The silence of the shed is absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of this grim preparation, a quiet prelude to the noise and heat and mess that will soon fill this space. The rough wooden surfaces of the internal timbers, cold and damp to the touch, frame this quiet, unseen ceremony of readiness. Outside the killing shed, the waiting animals, confined within their pens, begin to perceive the subtle, shifting currents in the air. Their instinct, honed over generations, registers the change in the human presence, the altered rhythm of the environment. The animals sense something. It is not yet a specific, identifiable threat, but an unsettling shift in the familiar patterns of their existence. The deep, earthy scent of their own bodies, of fresh straw and waste, is suddenly layered with an unfamiliar tension. The change manifests first in their sounds, their usual lowing, their rhythmic chewing, their gentle snorts. These familiar background noises begin to subtly alter. Their sounds are different now. A low, persistent murmur might begin, a restless shuffling of hooves against the packed earth, a sudden, sharp snort, followed by a deeper, more resonant exhalation of breath. The collective hum of their presence shifts, a subtle undercurrent of unease. The change intensifies, becoming more pronounced, more urgent. The individual sounds begin to carry a new quality, tense, frantic. A sudden, sharp bellow, torn from the throat of a bull, followed by a rapid stamping of its heavy hooves, reverberating against the wooden walls of its pen. A nervous whimper from a younger beast, a sound of profound anxiety. The sheep, usually a collective, docile presence, might begin to bleat incessantly, their cries higher, more insistent, almost piercing in the still, cold air. The pigs, usually content with their rhythmic grunts, might begin to squeal short, sharp bursts of sound, their movements agitated within their muddy confines. The very air within the pens seems to vibrate with their growing apprehension. The distinct smell of their fear, sharp and acrid, mingles with the familiar sense of their bodies and their waste, adding a new, unsettling layer to the pervasive atmosphere. Their breath, warm and moist, fills the cold air, rising in visible clouds from their nostrils, mingling with their agitated sounds. The constant pressure of their bodies, shifting restlessly against the rough wooden bars of their enclosures, creates a rhythmic creak, a persistent protest against their confinement. A frantic scraping of hooves against the packed earth floor, a desperate surge against the unyielding timber walls. These are the visual manifestations of their growing terror. Their eyes, wide and dark in the dim pre-dawn light, might reflect a primal, uncomprehending fear fixed on the approaching human figure, whose movements are now infused with a deliberate, grim purpose. The sounds of their growing agitation, their desperate pleas, fill the space around the pens, a stark counterpoint to the quiet, determined approach of the butcher. The cold morning air, so still moments before, now seems to carry the full weight of their mounting terror, transmitting it across the short distance, a visceral anticipation of the inevitable. The very air around the killing shed, before any work has even properly begun, carries a profound, pervasive weight of scent. It is an aroma that settles deep in the nostrils, clinging to the fabric of the clothes, to the very skin, refusing to be easily dislodged. The stench begins even before work starts. It is a complex layering of decomposition and dampness, of the raw materials of the trade. The most prominent note is the unmistakable smell of sour fat. Animal renderings, perhaps from days or weeks prior, having solidified and begun their slow decay, release a heavy, cloying odor. It is a thick, sickly, sweet smell, almost rancid, that coats the back of the throat and causes a subtle, involuntary tightening of the stomach. This aroma permeates the rough timber walls of the shed, seeping into the packed earth floor, clinging to every surface, a constant, unavoidable presence. It is the scent of processed death, slowly returning to the earth, a pervasive reminder of past labors. The feeling of the cold, damp air against the face seems to amplify this cloying sweetness, making it thicker, more oppressive. Beneath this, or perhaps intertwined with it, is the sharp, metallic tang of drying blood. Not the fresh, bright smell of recent slaughter, but the older, congealed essence, thick and dark, absorbing into the straw and earth. It is a powerful, almost primal scent, a chilling reminder of the life that has departed this place countless times before. This aroma seems to rise from the very ground, from the deep saturation of the earth beneath the layers of hay and waste. It is a cold smell, yet it resonates with a visceral heat in the mind. The subtle stickiness of the ground beneath the boots seems to carry this scent more strongly, a constant tactile connection to the raw material of the trade. And mingling with these animalic odors is the pervasive smell of wet wood. The rough timbers of the shed, perpetually exposed to dampness from the weather, from animal breath, from the constant process of washing down, absorb and release a musty, earthy aroma. It is the smell of decay and permanence combined, a deep, pervasive dampness that adds another layer to the heavy air. This is the scent of the structure itself, a silent witness to countless acts of slaughter, absorbing the essence of its grim purpose into its very fibers. The feel of the cold, damp wood against the hand, when leaning against a beam, seems to release a fresh burst of this musty odor. This is the omnipresent atmosphere of the killing shed, an unyielding combination of these potent aromas. It is a scent that penetrates beyond the superficial, lodging itself deep within the senses. The cold air carries everything deeper into the nose. Each breath, though cold and bracing, serves not to clear the air, but to draw the powerful odors further inward, allowing them to settle, to permeate. The chill, instead of dispersing the smells, seems to concentrate them, making them sharper, more potent, carrying their weight further into the lungs. And once these smells are encountered, once they are drawn into the body with each cold breath, they become an indelible part of the butcher's own being. It never truly leaves. The scent clings to the coarse garments, to the skin, to the hair, even after repeated washings in cold, harsh water. It permeates the pores, settles in the memory, becoming an intrinsic part of one's presence. The smell of the killing shed, of sour fat and drying blood and wet wood, travels with the butcher, a constant, subtle aura that marks them in the village, a silent testament to the nature of their work. Even in the brief warmth of the home hearth or the fleeting freshness of an open field, a subtle echo of this pervasive stench would remain, a constant internal reminder of the brutal reality of their trade. The metallic taste of blood, even when not present, could sometimes seem to manifest on the tongue, a phantom sensation brought on by the pervasive smell. The final moments of quiet, the profound stillness before the eruption, hold a unique, heavy tension. The air, thick with the pervasive stench and the animal's growing apprehension, seems to hum with an unspoken weight. The cold of the pre-dawn hour presses in, amplifying every subtle shift in sound, every tremor of the ground. The transition from anxious life to swift end often begins with an almost gentle, deceptive quietude. Death begins quietly. There is no dramatic flourish, no sudden, grand gesture. Only the measured, deliberate movements of the butcher, a purposeful grace born of long practice and grim necessity. The air, momentarily holding its breath, seems to listen. A steady, firm hand reaches out. It is a strong hand, calloused and thick with work, its skin rough from exposure to cold and constant dampness. It settles upon the animal's hide, perhaps on the broad flank of a cattle or the bristly neck of a pig. The warmth of the living flesh beneath the fingers is a brief, intimate connection, a profound contrast to the coldness of the tools, to the chill of the air. The muscles within the hand tense, preparing for the decisive movement, gathering strength, the faint scent of the animal's body. Its specific aroma of hair and warmth rises to meet the senses. Then, a precise pull. Not a violent wrench, but a controlled, powerful tug, guiding the animal's head or its limb into the optimal position. It is a movement of immense force, yet delivered with a practiced economy, designed to minimize struggle, to achieve the swiftest outcome. The animal might resist, a sudden tremor running through its body, a quick jerk of its head, but the pull is unyielding, insistent. The rough texture of the hide, resistant beneath the grasp, gives way to the persistent pressure. The sound of shifting hooves, a soft scuffle against the packed earth, might accompany this decisive movement, followed by a momentary, tense silence, and then the quiet introduction of a quiet blade. Not the bone-dull, rust-flecked edges of the initial gathering, but a freshly sharpened knife, its edge honed to a terrifying keenness. The cold metal, briefly exposed to the damp air, gleams faintly in the dimness, catching whatever stray light might penetrate the heavy gloom. The hand that holds it is steady, unhesitating, its purpose absolute. The blade finds its mark with a profound, almost silent precision, severing the vital connections that sustain life. There is no loud sound, no dramatic flourish, only the soft, wet sound of piercing flesh, a deep, muted thud absorbed by the heavy air and the dense darkness. The first, sharp scent of fresh, hot blood, metallic and vibrant, rises instantly, filling the air, mingling with the pervasive stench of the shed. This quiet beginning, however, is merely the prelude. For in the very next instant, the profound stillness shatters. Then it becomes noise, the deep, guttural bellow torn from the throat of the animal, a sound of primal agony echoing off the rough timbers of the shed. The frantic thrashing of heavy limbs striking against the packed earth, against the wooden walls, a violent, percussive symphony of struggle and despair. The sound of heavy breathing, strained and desperate, from both man and beast, fills the air, mingling with the terrifying screams. The vibrations of the struggle transmit through the very ground, through the rough wooden walls, a profound, unsettling tremor. The clatter of overturned buckets, the scrape of tools, the grunts of exertion, all merge into a cacophony of immediate, undeniable death. Alongside the noise, an intense heat begins to rise, the heat of exertion, of immense physical struggle, from both the living and the dying. The body of the animal, so recently warm with life, radiates a profound, visceral heat, its internal furnace still burning, even as life spills out. The air, already thick with scent, now becomes humid, heavy with the warmth of breath, of blood, of muscle. The sweat begins to bead on the butcher's brow, running in rivulets down the neck, soaking into the coarse fabric of the tunic and apron. The metallic scent of fresh, warm blood intensifies, rising in clouds of steam from the opened body. The contrast between the biting cold of the pre-dawn air and this sudden, overwhelming heat is stark, visceral, a testament to the raw energy unleashed in the act of dying. And with the noise and the heat comes the inescapable reality of mess. The rich, dark flow of blood, gushing from the severed arteries, cascades onto the packed earth floor, mingling with the old blood and hay, turning the surface into a slick, viscous mire. The hot, steamy breath of the animal mingles with the cold air, creating a swirling mist that catches the dim light. The raw contents of the animal's stomach, its undigested feed, might spill forth, adding a new, pungent layer to the pervasive stench of the shed. The rough fabric of the apron and tunic become quickly saturated, the hands and forearms coated in the slick, warm viscera. The feeling of the wet, sticky warmth against the skin is immediate and profound, a constant reminder of the raw, intimate nature of the work. The sounds of tearing flesh, of internal organs shifting are muffled, wet sounds absorbed by the heavy air. The transformation from quiet life to brutal, undeniable death is complete, marked by the overwhelming assault of noise, heat, and mess, a reality that consumes the senses, leaving no space for detachment. The initial rush of noise, heat, and mess settled into a grim, relentless rhythm. The stench of sour fat and drying blood permeated everything, clinging to the rough fabric of clothes, seeping into the skin. The cold morning air carried these smells deeper, a constant reminder of the shed's purpose. The animal's frantic cries, moments before, were now replaced by the wet, visceral sounds of dissection, a new kind of cacophony. The work itself, once the initial moments of raw violence passed, was less about delicate precision and more about brute force, applied with relentless consistency. Butchering is not precise. It is not the subtle artistry of a craftsman shaping fine wood, nor the careful measurement of a weaver's loom. There are no delicate instruments here, no fine adjustments. Instead, it is a primal engagement, a wrestling with dead weight and stubborn tissue. The air, thick with the scent of fresh blood and hot animal breath, pressed in close, demanding a different kind of focus. It is, instead, a relentless application of muscle. The shoulders burn with the effort of lifting and maneuvering heavy carcasses. The arms, thick and corded, strain with the repetitive hacking motions of the cleaver, the stubborn pull of sinew. The abdomen tenses with each powerful downward stroke, each forceful separation of bone from flesh. The very ground beneath the boots becomes a fulcrum for this exertion, providing the necessary leverage for tasks that demand immense physical power. The cold of the shed, initially sharp, begins to recede under the heat of this ceaseless physical output, sweat beading on the brow, running down the back, soaking into the coarse fabric of the tunic. The grunts of exertion, deep and guttural, are often the only sounds in the brief moments between the sharper noises of the work. And within this application of strength, there is a profound, almost hypnotic repetition. The same cuts, the same powerful swings, the same pulling and separating over and over again. The knife, dulled quickly by bone and gristle, is resharpened with rhythmic scrapes against a whetstone, a brief pause before the work resumes its relentless cycle. The hands move with an ingrained memory, a pattern established through countless acts of butchery. This repetition is not meditative. It is exhausting, grinding away at the body with each successive cycle. The sound of blade meeting bone, a dull thud or a sharp crack, is repeated endlessly, echoing within the confined space of the shed. The constant dampness of the surfaces, the slickness of fat and blood, ensures that every movement, however repetitive, requires a conscious effort to maintain footing, to keep the blade true. Beyond muscle and repetition, there is a delicate, precarious balance. The balance of the body, shifting with the weight of the carcass, leaning into each cut, each pull. The feet must find purchase on the slick, blood-soaked earth, constantly adjusting to avoid a treacherous slip. The body must compensate for the sudden release of tension when a muscle is severed or the abrupt give when a bone is cracked. It is a dance with dead weight, a constant negotiation between opposing forces, demanding a profound awareness of one's own body in relation to the heavy, inert mass. The subtle sway of the carcass as it hangs, swinging gently from its hooks, demands constant counter-movement, a shifting of weight, a repositioning of the feet. The cold air, thick with the pervasive stench, feels heavy against the skin, adding another layer to the challenge of maintaining equilibrium. This work is not about finesse, but about force. It is the steady, unyielding pressure of human strength against the stubborn resistance of animal form. The sounds are raw, unrefined. The dull thud of cleaver, the wet tearing of flesh, the rhythmic scrape of a knife against a bone. The air, thick with blood and animal heat, carries these sounds, these efforts, deep into the very core of being, a constant reminder of the brutal simplicity of the task. The rough texture of the cleaver's wooden handle, slick with a fine film of grease, demands a constant, powerful grip, the fingers aching with the persistent pressure. The raw process of separating muscle from bone, of transforming the whole into its usable parts, was a relentless encounter with resistance. The body of the animal, even in death, held onto its form with a stubborn tenacity, forcing the butcher's own body into ever greater effort. The joints of the carcass, thick with sinew and cartilage, offered a profound, unyielding opposition to the blade. The joints resist. To sever a leg from the torso or to separate the heavy shoulder required immense force, a persistent, grinding pressure of the blade against the stubborn tissue. The knife would bind, stick, requiring a powerful pull, a precise twist, a renewed application of brute strength. The sound was not a clean slice, but a tearing, a wet, grating sound of tissue giving way under duress. The cold air of the shed seemed to thicken around these points of resistance, making the effort feel heavier, more profound. The rough texture of the cartilage, tough and rubbery beneath the blade, communicated its stubborn defiance directly to the hands. And then, the bones, dense and unforgiving, posed their own challenge. The cleaver, heavy and blunt, was brought down with powerful, percussive blows. But the bones would often splinter, cracking with an uneven, jarring sound. Bones crack unevenly. Not a clean, crisp snap, but a dull, shattering crunch, reverberating through the hand, up the arm and into the shoulder. Fragments of bone, sharp and brittle, might fly outwards, a sudden, almost imperceptible sting against the skin of the face. The shock of the impact would travel through the body, a constant, repetitive, jarring sensation that settled deep into the wrists and elbows. The air, thick with the metallic tang of fresh bone marrow, filled the nostrils with each shattering blow. The feeling of the rough, splintered bone beneath the cleaver's edge, transmitting its unyielding nature directly through the tool, was a profound, tactile reminder of the force required. And the flesh itself, though yielding in places, could also present its own stubbornness. Flesh tears the wrong way. Instead of following the intended line, the knife would snag, pulling the muscle fibers in an unintended direction, creating ragged edges, wasting precious meat. This demanded a renewed effort, a careful repositioning of the blade, a frustrating adjustment to the animal's unpredictable form. The wet, tearing sound of the fibers, a soft, visceral rip, was an auditory manifestation of this resistance. The slickness of the fat, the wetness of the blood, made every cut precarious, every pull uncertain, requiring constant vigilance and a firm, unyielding grip. The pervasive smell of raw meat, warm and slightly sweet, intensified with each tearing action. This constant battle with resistance, this ceaseless effort against stubborn material, permeated the butcher's body. The shoulders would ache with a deep, persistent throb. The muscles in the arms would burn with an unrelenting fire. The hands, gripping and pulling and striking, would feel the constant strain, the accumulating fatigue, the repetitive impact, the relentless tearing, the jarring cracks. All these sensations settled deep into the joints, the bones, the very marrow, a constant, unyielding dialogue between the living body and the raw, unyielding material of its grim. Trade, the cold of the shed, ever present, seemed to stiffen the protesting muscles, making each motion a greater effort. The constant, brutal demands of the work, the relentless engagement with raw flesh and bone, imprinted themselves directly upon the butcher's own body. It was a physical toll, accumulated moment by moment, intensifying with each successive cut, each swing of the cleaver. The hands, those primary instruments of the trade, bore the most immediate evidence of this unceasing labor. The skin, perpetually damp with a mixture of water, blood, and fat, softened and then chafed, yielding to the constant friction of rough tools and coarse materials. Fingers blister. Small, tender pockets of fluid would rise beneath the hardened calluses, a painful protest against the relentless gripping, the powerful pulling, the steady pressure of the knife. These blisters, often unnoticed in the heat of the work, would burst, leaving raw, stinging patches of exposed flesh, vulnerable to the pervasive cold and damp. The constant sensation of rough wooden handles or the cold, pitted metal of the cleaver pressing against these tender spots was a persistent, gnawing discomfort. The faint smell of blood, mingling with the metallic tang of exposed skin, became an intimate, visceral aroma of suffering. The continuous, repetitive motions, the powerful swings, the twisting and turning required to separate heavy cuts, placed an immense strain on the delicate structures of the lower arm. Wrists ache. A dull, persistent throb would settle deep within the joints, a constant, throbbing pain that radiated upwards into the forearms, tightening the muscles, making every movement a conscious effort. The impact of the cleaver striking bone, the sudden jarring as a joint separated, sent shock waves through the wrists, exacerbating the deep-seated ache. The cold, damp air of the shed seemed to penetrate these aching joints, amplifying the stiffness, making them feel heavy and unyielding. The very act of clenching the fist, of applying power, became a source of increasing discomfort, and the entire structure of the torso, the very pillar of the body's strength, would slowly, inexorably, begin to yield to the constant bending, the lifting of heavy weights, the persistent strain of maneuvering inert, dense carcasses. The back folds in on itself. Not a sudden collapse, but a gradual, pervasive slumping, a rounding of the shoulders, a persistent curve in the lower spine. The muscles, constantly tensed, constantly bearing immense loads, would tighten into painful knots, refusing to fully straighten. A deep, gnawing ache would settle between the shoulder blades, a heavy pressure in the lower back that never truly receded. To stand upright for any length of time became an effort, the body yearning for the relief of bending, even if that bending was itself the cause of the pain. The cold dampness of the shed floor, the unyielding nature of the working surfaces, offered no respite to the protesting spine. The grunts of effort, often involuntary, were accompanied by a subtle shift of weight, a repositioning of the feet, seeking a fleeting moment of comfort for the straining back. This was the quiet, relentless disintegration of the body under the weight of its grim profession. Every physical action, every task, contributed to this accumulating toll. The rough texture of the apron, heavy with fat and blood, pressed against the aching back, adding to the constant burden. The smell of sweat and raw meat, constant in the air, became intimately associated with this pervasive physical suffering, a testament to the unyielding demands placed upon the living flesh. The very nature of the butcher's work, the raw materials of their trade, ensured a constant, pervasive presence of animal byproducts upon their person and within their environment. It was an inescapable intimacy with the very substances they worked with. The most insidious of these was the fat. Warm and viscous at first, then cooling to a thick, greasy film, it coated every surface, permeated every fiber. Fat clings to sleeves. The rough wool or linen of the tunic, meant to protect, quickly became saturated, its fibers absorbing the thick, opaque grease. The sleeves, particularly, would be heavy with it, feeling slick and cold against the skin, their texture transformed from dry fabric to a pliable, unctuous, second skin. The movement of the arms, the bending of the elbows, would cause the saturated fabric to rub against itself with a soft, squelching sound, a constant tactile reminder of its pervasive presence. The faint, sickly, sweet smell of souring fat would rise from these soaked sleeves, a constant cloying aroma that accompanied every movement, and it found its way into the most intimate crevices of the hands, defying efforts at cleanliness. Gets under nails. The thick, waxy substance would lodge beneath the fingernails, stubbornly adhering to the skin, resisting attempts to scrape it away with cold water or rough cloth. It would remain there, a subtle, greasy residue, a constant tactile reminder of the work, even during moments of respite. The sensation of the fat, gritty, and cold under the nails was an ongoing, subtle discomfort. The faint, cloying scent would emanate from the fingertips, a persistent aroma. But beyond the superficial clinging, the fat, warm and pervasive, seemed to penetrate the very pores of the skin itself. Soaks into the skin. The hands, the forearms, even the face would absorb the fine, oily film, feeling perpetually greasy, slightly clammy. It was a sensation that no amount of scrubbing with harsh soap or cold water seemed to entirely remove. The skin would retain a subtle sheen, a faint stickiness, even hours after leaving the shed. This deep saturation meant that the unique, cloying smell of animal fat was not just on the clothes, but emanated from the butcher's own body, a constant, intimate aura. The feeling of cool air against this subtly greasy skin was different, the cold clinging to the oily surface. This pervasive presence of fat, blood, and other animal detritus was not merely a consequence of the work. It was an integral part of the experience. Every surface, the tools, the chopping block, the very ground was coated in a film of it. The rough wooden handles of the knives, the cold iron of the cleaver, all felt subtly slick, demanding a constant, firm grip to prevent slipping. The cold, damp air of the shed, ever present, seemed to enhance this oiliness, preventing anything from truly drying, ensuring the constant, permeating dampness. The sound of a hand sliding across a fat-coated surface, a faint squish or a quiet drag, was a common auditory accompaniment to the work. This immersion in the raw, greasy material meant that the butcher carried the essence of their trade with them, an indelible mark that extended beyond the visual. It was a sensory signature, a constant, subtle reminder of the messy, visceral reality of their daily labor. The pervasive scent of blood and fat, the constant presence of exposed flesh, created an irresistible draw for creatures of the air. They arrived with a light, silent, and numerous, drawn by an ancient, undeniable instinct. Flies arrive early. Even before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, before the last vestiges of pre-dawn gloom had lifted from the shed, their presence would be subtly felt. A low hum, a faint fluttering in the periphery of vision. They were the silent, winged witnesses, drawn to the promise of the day's work. Their numbers would swell with the increasing light and warmth, filling the air with a low, persistent drone. Their buzzing, a monotonous, relentless sound, would quickly become a pervasive background noise, almost unnoticed in its constancy, yet subtly grating on the nerves. They would settle on every exposed surface, the rough timbers of the shed, the tools laid out for use, the patches of old blood on the ground. And inevitably, relentlessly, they would settle on the exposed flesh of the carcasses, drawn to the raw meat. The sound of their tiny, almost imperceptible footsteps, their constant cleaning of their legs, would sometimes be audible if the larger sounds of the shed briefly ceased. These creatures seemed to possess an uncanny awareness, a deep, primal understanding of the unfolding day. They know the rhythm. They did not arrive haphazardly, but with a precision that mirrored the butcher's own movements. They appeared as the first drops of blood struck the ground, as the first cuts opened the flesh. Their presence was a living clock, marking the stages of the work, from the initial quiet moments to the full, messy intensity of the process. Their numbers would peak during the most active phases of the butchery, their collective hum intensifying with the rising heat and scent of the work. The subtle shift in their buzzing, from a low drone to a more agitated hum, might even signal a particular stage of the process, a moment of heightened activity or fresh exposure. The feeling of their tiny, almost imperceptible landings on the skin, on the face, on the hands, was a constant, irritating sensation. They would walk across the eyelids, explore the lips, settle on the exposed skin of the forearms, their light touch a relentless, pervasive annoyance. A swat of the hand, a shake of the head, would dislodge them for a fleeting moment, only for them to return, persistent and unwavering, drawn back by the irresistible scent of their macabre feast. The cold air, even as it carried the stench, also carried the subtle, vibrating presence of their wings. Their dark forms, darting and swirling in the dim light, created a constant visual distraction, a swirling chaos that contrasted with the methodical movements of the butcher. Their presence was a constant reminder of the raw, primal nature of the work, of the swift transformation of living flesh into carrion, into sustenance. They were an intrinsic, inescapable part of the environment of the killing shed, their relentless hum and their pervasive presence a testament to the unvarnished reality of the butcher's daily world. The constant, sweet, cloying smell of fat and blood, their very sustenance, was the invisible force that orchestrated their tireless, buzzing dance. The persistent dampness of the shed, the constant presence of blood and fat, and the internal moisture of the animals themselves, combined to create an environment where grip was precarious and certainty elusive. Every surface becomes slick. The packed earth floor, initially dry, quickly transformed into a treacherous mire, a mixture of mud, blood, and discarded fat, its surface glistening faintly in the dim light. Each step required a conscious effort, a careful placement of the heavy boots to find any purchase, to avoid a sudden, jarring slip. The squelch of the boots, a constant wet sound, was absorbed by the pervasive dampness. The rough wooden chopping block, its surface scarred by countless blows, became coated in a fine, greasy film, making the placement of meat uncertain, the grip of tools less secure. The cleaver, the knives, their handles of wood or bone, absorbed the wetness and the grease, becoming slippery in the grasp, demanding a firmer, more conscious clenching of the fingers. The heavy chains used to hoist the carcasses felt cold and slick against the skin, their metal surfaces perpetually damp. Even the rough timbers of the shed walls, subtly coated with an invisible film, felt damp and unyielding to the casual touch. The cold air, thick with moisture and pervasive odors, seemed to cling to these slick surfaces, enhancing their slipperiness. This constant slipperiness permeated not just the physical actions, but began to subtly influence the internal landscape of the mind. Even thought becomes heavy. The clarity of decision, the swiftness of action, became burdened by a subtle dullness, a pervasive fatigue that seeped into the very processes of the mind. The cold, the stench, the relentless physical effort, all combined to create a mental sluggishness, a quiet inertia. Thoughts moved slowly, deliberately, as if wading through a viscous medium. The sharp edges of immediate problems might blur, their solutions requiring a greater, more laborious effort to reach. The raw, primal nature of the work, its relentless physicality, left little room for abstract reflection or nuanced consideration. The body, responding to the immense, unyielding demands placed upon it, seemed to take on a life of its own, functioning on an instinctual, almost unconscious level. The body moves on its own, without dignity or reflection. The powerful swings of the cleaver, the precise insertions of the knife, the grunting lifts of heavy carcasses, these were no longer deliberate, willed actions, but almost automatic responses, driven by muscle memory and the grim necessity of the task. The mind, dulled by fatigue and the relentless sensory assault, surrendered its command, allowing the body to take over, to execute the brutal dance of dismemberment. There was no sense of grace in these movements, no conscious artistry, only the raw, unvarnished efficiency of a body performing its grim function. The rough clothing, stained with blood and fat, clung to the skin, a constant reminder of the intimate, visceral nature of the work. The feeling of the wet, sticky surfaces, the pervasive chill of the air, the relentless buzzing of the flies, These sensations were absorbed by the body without conscious interpretation, becoming an inherent part of the physical process. The occasional slip on the slick floor, the momentary loss of balance, the jarring impact of bone against metal. These were simply part of the flow, absorbed and compensated for by a body operating on an almost primal level of survival. The pervasive stench, thick and cloying, seemed to enter the lungs with every breath, becoming one with the internal landscape, ensuring that even the most fleeting moment of reflection was overwhelmed by the raw reality of the senses. This was a state of being utterly immersed in the physical, a life lived through the relentless, unthinking actions of the flesh, divorced from the quieter, more reflective spaces of the mind. The body moved on its own, a silent instrument in the cold, slick, stench-filled shed. Every surface became treacherous with fat and blood, and even thought grew heavy, dulled by the relentless, brutal rhythm of dismemberment. The pervasive hum of flies, drawn by the unyielding scent of death, was a constant, irritating companion. The butcher, immersed in the raw, visceral reality of his trade, occupied a peculiar and often isolated position within the fabric of the village. His work was undeniably essential, a grim necessity, yet the nature of it, the constant proximity to death and mess, set him apart. He was a figure of quiet paradox, both vital and repulsive. The butcher is not respected, only tolerated. There was no honor bestowed upon his profession, no public accolades for his relentless labor. His existence was acknowledged, but often with a subtle turning away, a quiet distancing. The cold, damp air that clung to his garments, the pervasive, cloying scent that emanated from his skin, these were not merely physical attributes. They were a constant, invisible boundary marking him. When he walked through the village, perhaps to collect a new animal or to gather some meager supplies, a subtle shift would occur in the space round him. Children, sensing the unspoken cues from their elders, might quiet their play, their laughter momentarily hushed. Adults would offer a brief nod, a fleeting glance, but rarely a lingering eye contact, rarely an extended word. The rough texture of his working clothes, stiff with dried blood and fat, seemed to repel casual touch. He was necessary, but unwelcome. The very livelihood of the village, the sustenance that nourished its people through the lean seasons, depended on his grim expertise. Yet the act of providing that sustenance, the spilling of blood, the rending of flesh, was a task that most preferred to remain distant from, unseen, unheard. He was the one who delved into the primal, the messy, the unspeakable, allowing others to partake of the finished product without confronting its raw origins. This unspoken contract, this silent understanding, shaped his daily interactions. The distant sound of a bell from the village church, a familiar rhythm, seemed to mark a world that he was part of, yet distinctly separate from its sacred rituals untouched by the profanity of his trade. The communal well, a common gathering place for gossip and quiet exchange, might grow subtly quieter when he approached, its familiar clatter of buckets briefly muted. The space around him seemed to expand, as if others unconsciously sought to maintain a respectful yet firm distance. His presence was acknowledged, but not embraced. He moved through the daily routines of the village as a shadow might move amongst solid forms, recognized but not fully integrated. The pervasive smell of his work, though often unnoticed by him, acted as a constant, invisible herald of his approach, subtly altering the air around him, informing others of his proximity before he was even seen. His solitude was not a choice, but a consequence of his trade. The very nature of his work, the constant immersion in death, created a barrier, a quiet, invisible wall that separated him from the easy conviviality of others. He was the one who stepped willingly into the darkness, into the cold, into the mess, so that others might remain in the warmth, in the cleanliness, in the light. This silent understanding was etched into the subtle, averted gazes, the quickened footsteps, the quiet withdrawal of casual interaction, a constant, unspoken reminder of his unique, solitary burden within the communal life. The rough ground underfoot, so familiar, seemed to offer a steady, unyielding companionship. Unlike the fleeting presence of human interaction, the very purpose of the butcher's existence was to provide, to transform raw life into consumable sustenance. And for this, the villagers had to come to him, to the place of the killing, to receive the fruits of his grim labor. The village comes to him, not in a steady stream, but in deliberate, purposeful visits, each one an act of necessity, not desire. The approach to the shed was always hesitant, a subtle slowing of footsteps as the pervasive stench of sour fat and drying blood grew stronger in the air. They would arrive singly, or in small, hushed groups, their movements quiet, their faces often set in a neutral, almost unreadable expression. The heavy wooden door of the shed, still slick with the remnants of the day's work, would open to admit them, letting out a fresh wave of the cloying, metallic scent that permeated the space. Their eyes, when they met his, were brief, fleeting, often dipping downwards almost immediately. No one lingers. There was no casual conversation, no exchange of pleasantries, no comfortable passing of time. The purpose was clear, immediate, and singular: to obtain the meat. The air within the shed, thick with the smell of death and exertion, seemed to press upon them, making their breath shallow. Their movements were swift, purposeful, almost hurried. Their bodies held a subtle stiffness, a quiet tension that spoke of their discomfort. The rough timber walls, dark and stained, absorbed the silence of their discomfort. Most visibly, their gaze would avoid the raw reality of the surroundings. Their eyes would settle on the packaged cuts, wrapped in rough linen, or on the prepared portions of meat, but would quickly divert from the hooks holding remnants, from the bloodstains on the ground, from the various tools hanging from the walls. They hold their breath, avert their eyes. A quiet, almost imperceptible intake of breath, held for a few moments as they transacted, as if to minimize the amount of the shed's pervasive air drawn into their lungs. Their heads might turn slightly, their gaze fixed on some distant point, avoiding direct engagement with the visceral reality of the place, with the raw materials of its grim purpose. The few words exchanged were brief, functional, the weight desired, the cut requested, the price. Their voices were often hushed, almost whispers, as if the very act of speaking loudly would disturb the heavy atmosphere of the shed or acknowledge too directly the grim work that had just taken place. The cold, raw presence of the meat, wrapped in its rough linen, was the desired object, the reason for their unwilling presence. Once the transaction was complete, their departure was swift, almost a fleeing. A quick turn of the body, a rapid opening and closing of the heavy door, and then the quiet, hurried footsteps fading away into the more neutral air of the village. They left behind a quiet space that felt heavier, imbued with the memory of their brief, reluctant presence, their subtle discomfort. The pervasive hum of flies, constant and indifferent, resumed its relentless drone, undisturbed by the fleeting human visitations. The subtle creak of the door as it closed, then the abrupt silence, marked the end of another brief, necessary encounter. The very air that permeated the butcher's skin, the stains that clung to his garments, the constant presence of the winged creatures drawn to his trade, these were not simply facts of his work, but were actively attributed to his very being, becoming an indelible part of how he was perceived, how he was held apart. He is blamed for the smell, the filth, the flies. The cloying, metallic stench of sour fat and drying blood that followed him, clinging to his hair, his clothes, even rising from his pores, was not seen as a consequence of a necessary trade, but as a personal failing, a mark of his own inherent uncleanness. When a faint whiff of it drifted into the cleaner air of the village, a subtle wrinkling of noses might occur, a quiet turning away of heads, an unspoken accusation. The very air around him, thick with the scent of his labors, carried this silent judgment. He carried the burden of the unseen, the unspoken. The persistent filth that defined his working environment, the slick, blood-soaked earth, the greasy chopping block, the stained tools, was seen as an extension of his own person rather than the unavoidable reality of his gruesome task. Though others consumed the product of this filth, they preferred to assign its origin to him, to detach themselves from its messy reality. A subtle recoiling might occur if a hand, still bearing the faint residue of his work, came too close. The rough fabric of his apron, permanently stained with dark, irregular patches, was a visual testament to this perceived uncleanliness, an unavoidable mark of his trade. The feeling of rough, damp earth, permanently ingrained in the soles of his boots, contributed to this feeling of perpetual soil. And the relentless, buzzing presence of the flies, drawn by the raw essence of his trade, were seen as his companions, his familiar entourage. Their constant hum, their irritating landings, were an annoyance, and their presence near him was perceived as a confirmation of his inherent connection to decay, to the less savory aspects of life. They were a living, buzzing testament to the nature of his work, a persistent, audible accusation. He could swat them away, their brief dispersal momentary, but their return was inevitable, their presence an unyielding reminder of the perception that clung to him. The cold, damp air, though seemingly clean, became a conduit for these airborne accusers. This blame was rarely articulated in words. It was a silent judgment communicated through averted gazes, through subtle shifts in proximity, through the unspoken language of avoidance. It was a burden he carried constantly, an invisible shroud that separated him from the cleaner, more acceptable aspects of communal life. He was the scapegoat for the grim necessity, the repository for the collective discomfort with the brutal reality of sustenance. The pervasive presence of these sensations, the smell, the filth, the flies, became an indelible part of his public identity, a constant, unspoken accusation that marked him as separate, as forever tainted by the nature of his essential, yet repulsive, work. The rough, unyielding surfaces of the shed, imbued with these substances, seemed to echo this silent judgment, absorbing and radiating it back into the pervasive atmosphere. When the exchange of goods for coin occurred, it was a transaction marked by a peculiar, almost ritualized avoidance. The very act of touching, of direct contact, seemed to carry a subtle apprehension, a quiet revulsion. Money is exchanged quickly. The hand that offered the coin, or the small leather pouch, would move with a swift, almost abrupt motion, depositing it onto a rough wooden surface, the edge of the chopping block, a small worn table, rather than placing it directly into the butcher's outstretched palm. The coin itself, perhaps a small copper piece or a glint of silver, would be dropped with a faint clink onto the stained wood. The sound, sharp and clear in the heavy air of the shed, was quickly swallowed by the pervasive silence that followed. There was no lingering, no fumbling with fingers, no prolonged counting. It was a swift, efficient, almost impersonal transfer, designed to minimize contact, to reduce the time spent in the presence of the shed's pervasive stench. The cool, hard feel of the coin, briefly touched, was quickly relinquished. And sometimes this subtle avoidance was made manifest through an additional layer of separation. Sometimes with gloves, the customer, or perhaps a servant sent on their behalf, would wear a thick glove of rough leather or coarse wool on the hand that presented the payment. This added layer of fabric, a tangible barrier, served to protect the skin from any direct contact with the surface of the shed or with the butcher's own hand. The dull thud of the coin, muffled by the glove as it landed on the wood, underscored this deliberate distance. The scent of the leather or wool of the glove, a faint presence, would briefly mingle with the pervasive aroma of blood and fat, a stark contrast. The butcher's own hand, rough and stained, would then reach for the payment, lifting the coins from the wood with a quiet, efficient movement. There was no comment, no outward sign of offense or recognition of this subtle act of repulsion. It was an unspoken understanding, an accepted reality of his trade. The cold, hard feel of the metal coins in his own hand, sometimes slick with an imperceptible film of grease, was a familiar sensation, a tangible outcome of his labor. The exchange was a moment of necessary connection, yet one fraught with subtle tension. It was a direct acknowledgement of his utility, but an equally potent unspoken assertion of his uncleanliness. The air, thick with the pervasive odors of the shed, seemed to witness this quiet ritual of detachment, absorbing the unspoken anxieties of those who sought the product of his grim work. The small, quick movements of the hands, the averted eyes, the muffled clink of coin on wood, these were the silent gestures of a world that needed his service, but wished to remain untouched by its raw reality. The ultimate output of the butcher's brutal labor was the very sustenance that sustained the village, the raw material that fueled its bodies and warmed its hearths. Yet, a clear distinction was drawn between the product and its producer. The meat is needed. It was the essential commodity, the protein that gave strength to the fields, to the craft, to the families. It was sought out, bought, and consumed with a quiet appreciation for its life-giving properties. The rich, earthy scent of raw meat, carefully wrapped, was a promise of nourishment, a tangible symbol of survival. The need for it was constant, unwavering. Through the lean winter months, when other provisions dwindled, the stored meat, smoked or salted, became a vital anchor. In times of feasting, fresh cuts brought joy and celebration. It was a tangible bridge between the cycles of life and death, a necessary transformation for human continuation. The sounds of sizzling meat over a fire, the communal enjoyment of a hearty meal, these were the direct results of his hidden labors. The cold, damp environment of the shed, where the transformation took place, stood in stark contrast to the warmth and conviviality of a meal shared. Yet, despite this profound, undeniable necessity for the product of his hands, there was a stark, almost brutal detachment from the hands themselves. The butcher is not. He was the instrument, the means to an end, a figure whose presence in the transaction was both required and swiftly dismissed. Once the meat was exchanged for coin, once the purpose was served, his direct utility ceased. His rough hands, stained and calloused, were the conduit through which life became sustenance, but they were not to be lingered upon, not to be welcomed beyond the immediate necessity of the trade. He was the unseen force, the one who stepped into the shadow so that others might enjoy the light. The value lay in the severed flesh, in the transformed animal, not in the individual who performed the brutal transformation. The heavy wooden door of the shed, which closed behind each customer, symbolized this separation, this quiet dismissal. He was left within the confines of his work, surrounded by the remnants of his gruesome tasks, while the meat, clean and packaged, journeyed into the heart of the village, into the warmth of its hearths, into the communal life from which he remained. Subtly excluded, this was the quiet paradox of his existence, essential yet disposable, vital yet peripheral. His skilled hands provided the very stuff of life, yet those hands, and the man to whom they belonged, were not themselves desired. The cold, damp air of the shed, thick with the scent of his trade, felt like a constant companion, an unspoken testament to this profound isolation. The rhythmic drip of condensation from the rough timbers, echoing softly in the quiet, seemed to underscore this stark reality. When the long day's work in the chilling, stench-filled shed finally drew to a close and the last customer had departed, a profound quiet would settle upon the butcher. The heavy wooden door, once a portal for fleeting interactions, would be firmly latched, shutting him in with the remnants of his grim labor. The pervasive cold within the shed, intensified by the fading light, seemed to deepen with the silence. The tasks of cleaning, of tidying the tools, of hosing down the blood-soaked floor were done with a heavy, methodical weariness. The water, cold and often brackish, sluiced across the packed earth, carrying away the thick, dark residue, mixing with the pervasive stench of sour fat and drying blood. The air, heavy with the humid mist rising from the wet floor, became even thicker, more oppressive. The sounds were muted now, the scrape of a brush against the earth, the soft clink of metal tools being put away, the rhythmic flow of water. When all was done, and the shed returned to its quiet, eerie stillness, the butcher would make his way back to his own dwelling. The path felt longer in the deepening twilight, the ground underfoot still yielding with the subtle slickness of old blood. The cold air, though perhaps fresher than that within the shed, still carried the lingering, pervasive scent of his trade. He would enter his home, a single room perhaps, its hearth fire a low glow, offering little more than a fragile warmth against the encroaching night. The rough fabric of his working clothes, heavy with absorbed odors, would be carefully removed, folded and set aside, perhaps near the door, allowing its potent scent to dissipate somewhat from the immediate living space. The meal, when it was prepared, was simple, often consumed in silence. There was no communal table, no shared warmth of family voices, no easy laughter filling the small space. At night, he eats alone. The wooden bowl, perhaps holding a thin gruel or a small portion of the less desirable cuts from his own day's labor, would be held close to the weak warmth of the hearth. The rhythmic scrape of his spoon against the bowl, the soft sounds of his own chewing, were the only companions in the quiet room. The faint scent of the simple food, warm and earthy, offered a brief, fleeting solace against the pervasive atmosphere that clung to him. And as he ate, or as he later prepared for sleep, the indelible essence of his day's work remained. The smell follows him to sleep. It was not merely on his skin or his clothes, it had permeated his very being, settled deep within his nostrils, within his memory. The cloying sweetness of sour fat, the sharp metallic tang of blood, the damp, earthy aroma of wet wood and animal waste. These were the constant companions of his private hours. They infused the air of his dwelling, subtly altering the familiar sense of home. As he lay upon his straw mattress, the rough wool blanket pulled close against the chill that seeped from the earth, the smells would accompany him into the darkness. They would intertwine with the faint scent of old straw, with the stale aroma of sleep itself. Even in the deepest slumber, the mind, perhaps, would continue to process these pervasive odors, weaving them into the subconscious landscape of dreams. He breathed them in with every breath, and with every exhalation, they were released back into the air, a constant, undeniable part of his presence, even in the stillness of the night. This was the quiet, solitary burden of his trade, an indelible mark that extended beyond the waking hours, permeating the very fabric of his rest, ensuring that even in the profound silence of sleep, the raw reality of his daily labor was never truly absent. The distant hoot of an owl, cutting through the night, seemed to underscore his quiet, singular existence. At night, he ate alone, the pervasive smell of his trade clinging to him, following him even into sleep. The village came to him for meat, but no one lingered. He was needed, but not welcomed, blamed for the filth and the flies, a necessary yet isolated figure in the stark landscape of the working world. The passage of seasons, the relentless cycle of daily effort, left an indelible mark on the butcher's body. It was a slow, inexorable sculpting, a shaping by the unyielding demands of his trade and by the cumulative weight of years. The changes were subtle at first, then more pronounced, altering his very posture, his movement through the world. The constant bending over carcasses, the heavy lifting, the powerful downward strokes of the cleaver. These actions, repeated countless times over decades, reshaped the very frame. Over time, the body changes. The broad, strong shoulders, once capable of immense effort, began to lose their outward curve, their powerful convexity. Instead, they yielded to the persistent pressure, drawing inward, creating a subtle concavity. Shoulders curve inward, a perpetual posture of stoop and weariness, as if perpetually hunched against the cold, or perpetually leaning over a task that demanded constant physical exertion. The muscles that once held them upright now seemed to pull them forward, a testament to the cumulative burden carried. The rough fabric of the tunic and apron, worn by constant friction, seemed to settle more deeply into this new, accustomed curve. The faint scent of old wool, mingled with the pervasive odor of his trade, seemed to cling to these weary shoulders, a constant, heavy presence. And the legs, the very pillars of his strength and balance, accustomed to standing on uneven, slick ground, to bracing against heavy weights, began their own transformation. The steps, once purposeful and quick, grew wider, slower, requiring more effort to maintain equilibrium. The legs grow wide and slow, a deliberate, almost waddling gait, each foot seeking a surer purchase on the perpetually damp and treacherous floor of the shed or the uneven earth of the village path. The muscles, thickened by years of constant exertion, now felt heavy, ponderous, their elasticity diminished. The knees, subjected to constant bending and strain, stiffened, protesting with every movement, their internal structure gritting with a dull, persistent ache. The subtle drag of the heavy leather boots, worn smooth by countless miles, became more pronounced, a quiet whisper against the earth. The pervasive chill from the ground, absorbing into the wide, slow legs, seemed to root him more deeply to the earth. This physical transformation was not a sudden event, but a gradual settling, a slow yielding of flesh and bone to the relentless forces of time and labor. The skin, weathered and leathery, took on the texture of ancient parchment, etched with lines that spoke of sun and wind, of cold and countless hours of grim purpose. The breath, once deep and strong, grew shallower, more labored, each inhalation a conscious effort against the weight of the air, the cold, the accumulated weariness. He moved through the world as if carrying an invisible burden, his very form a testament to a life lived in constant, brutal physical engagement. The sounds of his movements, the subtle creak of protesting joints, the slow shuffle of his feet filled the quiet spaces around him, a constant, gentle hum of attrition, the constant effort. The pervasive cold, the deep-seated exhaustion, all combined to infuse the butcher's hands, those primary tools of his trade, with a permanent, subtle tremor. It was a physical manifestation of a body pushed beyond its natural limits, a nervous energy that found no release. The hands are always trembling, even in moments of quiet rest, when they lay upon the coarse fabric of his lap, or when they reached for a simple wooden bowl, the fingers would hold a persistent, fine vibration. It was not a violent shaking, but a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor, a constant low hum of internal unease that belied any outward attempt at stillness. When the hands reached for a tool, the heavy cleaver, the long-bladed knife, the whetstone, the tremor would intensify slightly, a testament to the lingering muscle fatigue, to the persistent ache in the wrists and shoulders. The cold metal of the blades, the rough texture of the wooden handles seemed to amplify this trembling, making the grip feel less secure, less confident. The metallic scent of the tools, mingled with the faint, familiar aroma of blood and fat, seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the trembling fingers. Even when deliberately held still, when attempting to steady them against a surface, the subtle vibration would persist. Even when still, the hands would continue their minute internal dance, a quiet, insistent reminder of the toll exacted by countless acts of cutting, chopping, pulling, and lifting. To hold a cup of water, its cool surface against the skin required a conscious effort, the liquid within sometimes trembling faintly at the lip, a quiet echo of the hand that held it. The rough ceramic of the cup, cool and unyielding, seemed to transmit the tremor directly to the palm. The movements required for the grim work, the precision of the cut, the steady aim of the cleaver, these became harder to achieve, demanding an even greater concentration, a deeper well of energy that was increasingly scarce. The fine film of grease, perpetually clinging to the skin of the hands, seemed to enhance the sensation of the tremor, making them feel less substantial, less fully controlled. The faint sounds of the trembling, the almost imperceptible rustle of clothing against skin, the quiet brush of finger against palm, were absorbed by the deep silence of the shed or by the quiet of his dwelling. This constant tremor was not a sign of fear, but of profound, unyielding weariness. It was the body's quiet, persistent protest against the relentless demands placed upon it, a visible manifestation of the invisible forces that had shaped and worn it down. It spoke of a lifetime of physical labor, of cold and damp, of unending engagement with the raw, brutal processes of life and death. The heavy, pervasive smell of the shed, a constant companion, seemed to weigh upon the trembling hands, making them feel heavier, less their own. As the butcher's body yielded to the relentless press of time and ceaseless labor, his capacity for the auxiliary tasks of his trade, the maintenance and upkeep of his working space, diminished. And with this diminishment came a subtle, almost imperceptible withdrawal of communal support, an unspoken decision to let certain things fall into disrepair. No one helps clean the blood, the fat, the offal. These remnants of his grim work, once meticulously sluiced away with cold water and rough brushes, now lingered longer, clinging to the packed earth floor, congealing in stagnant puddles, their pervasive stench growing. Stronger, more permanent, the raw scent of decay, sharp and metallic, intensified its grip on the air. The heavy wooden tools, the iron hooks, the cleavers and knives, once regularly scoured and oiled against the relentless march of decay, now began to succumb to the dampness and the pervasive presence of organic matter. The tools rust. The keen edges, once painstakingly honed, grew duller, pitted with dark patches of orange-brown corrosion. The rough wooden handles, once worn smooth by constant use, began to fray, absorbing the insidious moisture, becoming slick with accumulated grime. The rhythmic scrape of a whetstone against a blade became rarer, its sound almost forgotten in the quiet of the shed, a testament to the increasing difficulty of maintaining their function. The feel of the cold, rough rust against the skin of the hands, a subtle abrasion, was a constant tactile reminder of the encroaching disrepair. The sturdy wooden troughs, once carefully constructed to hold fresh water for cleaning or to collect the remnants of the slaughter, began their slow disintegration. The troughs rot. The constant presence of water, of blood, of animal waste, coupled with the lack of diligent care, caused the timber to soften, to darken, to crumble slowly at the edges. A pervasive, sweet, fungal smell of decaying wood mingled with the other, harsher odors of the shed, adding another layer to the complex, unyielding aroma. The subtle creak of the rotting wood, yielding beneath a touch, was a quiet sound of decay. And the very structure of the shed itself, its primary purpose to shelter the grim work, began to show the signs of neglect. The thick thatch roof, once meticulously layered against the elements, yielded to the persistent wind and rain. The roof leaks. Small dark patches of dampness would appear on the rough timbers of the ceiling, slowly expanding. A rhythmic drip, a faint splash against the packed earth floor would mark the arrival of rain, creating small muddy puddles that added to the general mire. The constant dampness permeated the air, clinging to the skin, intensifying the chill that settled deep within the bones. The sound of the dripping water, constant and monotonous, echoed in the stillness, a subtle lament for neglected maintenance. This quiet decay, this slow disintegration of the working environment, was a direct consequence of the butcher's own diminishing strength and the community's unspoken decision to offer no direct aid. It was a mirroring of his own physical decline, the shed itself transforming into a reflection of his increasing frailty. The pervasive stench, the ever-present flies, the tangible signs of decay, these became the indelible hallmarks of his working space, a testament to the unyielding reality that in this world some burdens were carried alone and some things were allowed to simply fall apart, gently, inevitably, with the passage of time. Despite the butcher's failing strength, the encroaching disrepair of his shed, and the subtle withdrawal of communal aid, the fundamental demand of the village remained constant, unyielding. The essential need for sustenance dictated an unbreakable rhythm. The animals never stopped coming. Day after day, week after week, whether the sun rose bright and clear or the sky hung low and heavy with rain, the delivery would occur. A farmer, perhaps, leading a single heavy steer by a thick rope, its lowing a deep, resonant sound in the quiet morning air. Or a group of villagers herding a small flock of sheep, their persistent bleating a restless murmur on the path. The sound of their hooves, soft against the muddy earth, then a shuffling outside the killing shed, was a familiar, inescapable herald. The earthy animal scent of their bodies, distinct and alive, would briefly cut through the pervasive stench of the shed, a poignant reminder of their temporary vitality. Their arrival was always purposeful, always with the same grim intention. They would be led to the pens adjoining the shed, their nervous movements, their wide, dark eyes reflecting a primal apprehension that never quite diminished. The heavy wooden bars of the pens, scarred by countless prior confinements, would receive them, holding them in their last brief hours of life. The rhythmic breathing of the confined animals, their restless shifts of weight, filled the air with a living pulse. The cold air, carrying the faint scent of their fear, seemed to quicken with their agitated movements. The butcher's own weariness, the persistent ache in his bones, the trembling of his hands, these were irrelevant to the unyielding demand. The need for meat, for the life-giving protein, for the fuel that sustained the village through its constant labors, transcended individual frailty. The rhythm of slaughter was deeply embedded in the very fabric of communal survival, a necessity that acknowledged no pause, no respite. The tools, though rust-flecked and dull, still had to perform their grim function. The hands, though trembling, still had to grasp the blade. The body, though weary and stooped, still had to make the decisive moves. Each new animal represented a renewed commitment to the brutal dance of dismemberment, a fresh encounter with noise, heat, and mess. The pervasive hum of flies, constant in the air, would intensify with each new arrival, drawn by the renewed promise of raw flesh. The cycle was relentless, unbreakable, dictated by the fundamental human need for food. Even as the butcher faded, as his world contracted, the continuous, undeniable stream of living beings awaiting their transformation remained a constant, unyielding presence, a testament to the enduring, brutal reality of his essential yet isolated trade. The unyielding rhythm of the animal's arrival, the constant demand for meat, continued its relentless drumbeat against the butcher's diminishing strength. Each morning presented the same challenge, the same expectation, a stark counterpoint to the body's increasing inability to perform its grim tasks. And then, one day, the familiar weight of exhaustion, the profound ache in the bones became absolute, overwhelming all remaining will. The deep, pervasive cold of the dwelling, seeping from the packed earth floor and through the rough timbers, seemed to hold him in its unyielding embrace. The straw mattress, thin and unyielding, offered no true comfort. The body, accustomed to rising before the first hint of dawn, to moving towards the killing shed in the profound darkness, now found itself unable to respond. One day, the butcher is too tired to rise. The eyelids, heavy with a profound, unyielding weariness, remained stubbornly closed. The limbs, leaden with an accumulated fatigue that transcended mere sleep, refused to obey the faint stirrings of conscious thought. The faint murmur of the village awakening, the distant crow of a rooster, the familiar clatter of buckets at the well, these sounds drifted in from the outside world, muffled and distant, no longer possessing the power to rouse. The scent of wood smoke, rising from neighboring hearths, offered a faint, fleeting warmth that did not penetrate the deep cold of his own body. He lay in a state of profound stillness, a quiet surrender to the overwhelming weight of years and ceaseless labor. The rough wool blanket, pulled close against the chill, felt heavy, almost suffocating, yet offered no true warmth. The knives, those primary instruments of his trade, lay in their customary place, wrapped in their coarse cloth, unperturbed by the passing hours. Their rust-flecked blades, dull and cold, remained untouched, the knives stay wrapped. There would be no rhythmic scrape of the whetstone, no powerful swings of the cleaver, no precise insertion of the blade into living flesh. The work, the grim, unyielding purpose that had defined his waking hours for decades, simply did not begin. The silence in the killing shed, normally broken by the sounds of slaughter, remained profound, disturbed only by the buzzing of the ever-present flies, drawn by the lingering scent of past endeavors. The cold air, thick with the pervasive stench of sour fat and drying blood, remained undisturbed by the heat of human exertion, by the raw warmth of spilling life. The animals, perhaps, would arrive at the pens, their lowing and bleating growing more insistent, their nervous movements more agitated as the usual hour passed without the expected presence. But no one would come to meet them. The demand for meat would remain, but the instrument through which that demand was met had, finally, yielded. This was not a choice, not a decision, but a profound, ultimate exhaustion, a quiet, absolute cessation of effort. The body, worn beyond repair, had simply ceased its tireless struggle, choosing the profound stillness of an unbreakable rest. The rough texture of the packed earth floor, its coldness seeping upwards, provided a final, quiet resting place for a body that could no longer stand. And yet, even as the butcher's body lay still, even as the knives remained wrapped and the shed fell into deeper disrepair, the pervasive, defining essence of his life's work lingered, an indelible presence that permeated the very fabric of his world. And yet, the smell remains. It was an aroma woven into the very structure of the killing shed, a testament to countless acts of slaughter, to decades of blood and fat. The wood of the timbers, rough and unplaned, had absorbed the essence of its purpose over generations. The sour, cloying scent of fat, the metallic tang of drying blood, the musky odor of animal waste. These had permeated the fibers of the ancient beams, settling deep within their grain. Even on a clear, cold morning, when the air felt crisp, a subtle, almost imperceptible whiff of these pervasive aromas would rise from the walls, from the rough wooden surfaces of the chopping block, from the tools that lay unused. It was a ghost scent, a lingering echo of countless grim acts, a permanent signature of the place. The rough texture of the wood, now slowly decaying, released these odors in a slow, constant exhalation. And the very earth beneath the shed, the packed soil that had witnessed every spilling, every fall, every collection of vital fluid, held the indelible memory of those events. The ground itself was saturated, imbued with the raw, visceral essence of life and death. Digging into it would release a deep, metallic aroma, a profound testament to the unyielding absorption of organic matter. The dampness that perpetually rose from the earth carried this scent upwards, a constant exhalation from the very ground that sustained the dwelling and its gruesome purpose. The subtle stickiness of the earth, even when dry on the surface, whispered of this deep saturation. Beyond the physical presence, the smell remained in the realm of shared understanding, in the unspoken knowledge of the village. It lingered in memory, a subtle phantom aroma invoked by the very thought of the shed or the mention of the butcher's name. It was the scent of necessity, of survival, of the raw, brutal bargain made between human life and animal death. It clung to the communal consciousness, an invisible yet powerful reminder of the source of their sustenance. The absence of the butcher did not diminish this memory. Rather, it intensified it, making the pervasive smell an even stronger testament to the unique, isolated burden he had carried. The flies, though perhaps less numerous without the fresh promise of the day's work, would still hover, drawn by the lingering essence, their soft, persistent hum a quiet accompaniment to the unyielding presence of the odor. The cold air, when it swept through the silent, decaying shed, would stir these pervasive aromas, carrying them outwards, a subtle, atmospheric testament to a life that had fully embraced the raw realities of flesh and blood, a life that, even in its stillness, continued to emanate the indelible essence of its grim purpose. The sounds of the distant village, muffled by the stillness, would pass by, seemingly unburdened by this deep, heavy presence. To be the butcher in such a time, in such a world, was to exist at a profound intersection of life and death, necessity and revulsion. It meant living in constant, visceral communion with the raw mechanics of sustenance. What did it mean to live like this? It meant a life defined by the body, not merely as a vessel for thought or spirit, but as an instrument of tireless, often brutal, labor. The shoulders, bowed by years of heavy lifting, the hands, calloused and trembling, were not just markers of age, but living histories of effort, of connection to the animal, to the earth. It meant an intimate knowledge of flesh, of bone, of the hidden structures that held life together. This was not abstract anatomy, but a felt, tactile understanding, gleaned through repetition, through struggle, through the yielding of sinew and the stubborn resistance of joint. The tools, dull and rust-flecked, became extensions of the weary body, each strike, each cut, a direct conversation with the material world. There was no room for illusion, no space for detachment. Life fed on death. And the butcher was the inescapable mediator of that truth. This existence meant a unique form of solitude. Though present in the village, part of its essential rhythm, the butcher was also profoundly separate. The pervasive smell, the constant filth, the insistent flies, these were not merely unfortunate consequences of his trade, but invisible barriers subtly pushing others away. The quick exchange of money, the averted gazes, the unspoken blame for discomfort, painted a picture of a man needed for his function, but unwelcome in his person. His was a life lived at the periphery of warmth, of ease, of communal acceptance, an outsider drawn into the most intimate, yet most repulsive, act of survival. Yet there was a quiet dignity in this unwavering necessity. The meat was needed. The endless procession of animals, the constant demand, affirmed his vital role, even if unspoken. He was the one who faced the primal reality so others might eat, might thrive, might live lives less directly touched by the raw processes of life's termination. This was not a choice for ease, but an acceptance of a fundamental burden, a grim service rendered. And as the body succumbed, as the hands trembled and the legs grew slow, as the tools rusted and the shed decayed, there was a final, profound integration. The butcher became one with the smell, with the earth, with the memory of his trade. His physical presence might fade, but the essence of his labor, the pervasive aroma, the indelible mark on the environment, would linger. It was a testament to a life lived not in comfort or acclaim, but in a raw, unyielding engagement with the very fabric of existence, a life whose meaning was etched into every bone, every drop of blood, every particle of the earth it served. It was a life profoundly, unshakably real in a world that demanded such raw authenticity. The last faint glow from the horizon fades, leaving the village in profound, unyielding darkness. The wood smoke from distant hearths, a thin, ethereal ribbon against the vast sky, gradually thins, dissolving into the cold, silent air. The wind, a constant, ancient presence, whispers through the bare branches of the trees, a soft, melancholy sigh that carries no urgency, only the profound, patient rhythm of the turning world. The earth, cold and unyielding beneath the quiet structures, absorbs all sound, all warmth, all movement, a silent, enduring witness. The heavy wool blanket, its rough texture familiar against the cooling skin, lies undisturbed, its final warmth gradually dissipating into the pervasive chill of the dwelling. The subtle rustle of straw beneath a silent form is heard no more, absorbed into the deepening quiet. The rhythmic sound of breath, which once held the slow, steady story of a life lived in raw physical engagement, now ceases, gently, imperceptibly, leaving only a profound stillness. The single, faint flicker of a candlelight, perhaps from a distant neighbor's window, remains a tiny, fragile beacon against the vast, encompassing darkness. Then, too, it vanishes. The dust motes, suspended in the last faint shafts of moonlight that might penetrate the small, unglazed opening of the dwelling, cease their slow, ethereal dance, settling gently upon every surface. The rough timbers, the packed earth floor, the unused, rust-flecked tools. They cover all equally, a fine, silent blanket of time. The story does not end with a final image, but dissolves, like the last wisp of smoke from a forgotten chimney, gradually dispersing into the endless sky. There is no conclusion, no resolution, only a quiet, gentle vanishing. The particular contours of this life, the brutal rhythm, the pervasive scent, the heavy effort, all soften, blur, and recede. The echoes of the past, the textures of the raw world, the insistent smells, the subtle sounds, all become one with the deep, ancient silence of time itself. There is no final word, no lasting image, only a soft, pervasive sense of timelessness, of slowness, and a gentle, inevitable fading into the vast, unspoken quiet that holds all things that once were and all things that will be. The butcher's body, returned to the earth it served, becomes indistinguishable from the soil, its grim journey complete, its existence absorbed back into the silent, enduring rhythm of the world.